All right, Shabbos, good morning, good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share, to thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, Mrs. Bracha Strimber, in memory of her husband, Avraham ben Kalman, Eliezer, HaLevi, Bracha. And to thank Ayal Sara Steinberg for dedicating all of Shir and Drushos this month in the zechus of refuah sheleimah for Shulamis bas Susha. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah, the family a nechama, and the chola should have a refuah sheleimah together with kol cholei Yisrael. We will say thank you to Rabbi Richter for giving daf on Shabbos, to Kalman Akiva for giving shir yesterday. The Baruch and welcome back to all the members of the Archei Kala, Baruch Hashem, who arrived back in America yesterday. We had the great zechus to do the daf together on the bus. Well, we had a great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to do the daf in Tzvas, in Hebron, in Yerushalayim, and on the New Jersey Turnpike. So Baruch Hashem, all kinds of holy locations. Baruch Hashem. So is that the big four, right? The big four, the holy sites. And Baruch Hashem. So it's part of the beauty of the daf, Baruch Hashem, is that it doesn't stop at all. So we'll say, but it's a great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be back with all of you, although it would be even better if all of us were together in Eretz Yisrael. But at least, again, if you can't be in the place that you love, at least you could be with the people that you love. So it is a great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be with all of you and to continue in our journey through Maseches Nazir. We'll say today's daf is Daf Chaf Beis, and we are picking up on Chaf Aleph Amud Beis 21b Tashma. We'll say which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom. So we'll say, so if you remember again, what we are focusing on a little bit over here, or a lot over here, is a really fascinating discussion regarding what are the mechanics of Hafara, which is actually a discussion that we began in Maseches Nedarim, and that is now carrying on here because of its implication regarding Nazirus. So you remember again, we have two possibilities. When a husband goes ahead and annuls his wife's neder, what is he doing? Is it Megas Gayas? Is he simply shutting it down from this point going forward? So in other words, the neder existed. Just what the husband is doing is he's stopping it, he's ending it from this point going forward, and from this point forward, there's no longer any type of neder. Or do we say me'akar, which means a husband retroactively uproots the neder as if it never existed. So also, we've already pointed out a number of different nafkaminas in this particular discussion, so we're continuing. So Tashma, says the Gemara, Tashma, ha'isha shenadra ben Nazir v'haisa shosi yainu mitam l'meisim. So we'll say, here's the case. A woman went ahead and she made an eder naziros. So she made an eder naziros, and what happens? V'haisa shosi yain. She was drinking wine mitam l'meisim, and ultimately again she was becoming tamil l'meisim. So we'll say, you'll ask yourself, so why would someone do that? And she became it almost seems as if that halacha l'maisa. She's going ahead. I will say, Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, 6 lines up, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom. Right? So we'll say, so again, so you have a woman who became a Nazira, and she's going ahead and drinking wine, and she's coming to Me'el Mason. So we'll say, so you say to yourself, why? Now, the truth is, you're already grown accustomed to these kind of cases. We don't ask why, right? It just is. I will say, but there is sometimes there's a profound yisod in a lot of these cases as well. You say to yourself, why would someone ever do this? I will say, we do this all the time. Right? I'm bound by certain obligations, right? And I live outside of those obligations. And I know that I'm living outside of those obligations, because Rabbi say what it means to be human means to live with inconsistencies. And we all do it. The only question is, to what degree of inconsistency do we live with? And as part of the human condition, I go through every day of life knowing that there are certain things I should do, and I'm not doing them. And certain things I shouldn't do, and I am doing them. Does that make me unholy? No. What it does is it makes me human. And I will say, what's the goal in life? What's the ultimate goal in life? The goal in life is to address your inconsistencies. That's the goal. Be honest enough to acknowledge that they exist. Here are my inconsistencies, A, B, C, and D. And now what am I going to do to somehow address them one at a time? That's the case, I will say. That's the Musra in this case. Ha'isha shenadra ben Nazir. Here's a woman who wants something more out of life. And yet, what does she do? She's drinking wine. She's coming to me. One second. Do you want it? Do you don't want it? No, I want both. I want greater Kedusha, but I also can't get out of my own way in terms of getting rid of my inconsistencies. What's the halacha? So ultimately, she gets malchus. Okay, so that's not a chiddush. In other words, she's violating the terms of her nazirus. I asks the Gemara, what's the case? If her husband never annulled the neder, then tzricha l'meimar. Shabbos say, I don't say, what's the case? Rachel's married to Ruvain. Rachel became a Nazira, right? After she became a Nazira, both say, what did she decide to do? I became a Nazira, what did she decide to do? Let's go celebrate, right? Let's open a couple of bottles, right? Mazel tov, right? So she becomes a Nazira. So now the Bracha says, or again, let's go celebrate, right? I'm sponsoring the bus to the cemetery, whatever it is. So Lamaisa, so the Bracha says she gets Malkus. So, okay, like what's the Chiddush? That's Nazirus 101. Right, you go, you take an head Nazirus, then you go, you violate the terms of your Nazirus, ultimately you get Malkus. So what's the case? So Al Pshita, the Hefer Labal. Rather, we'll say, what has to be the case? It must be that the case ultimately is where the husband did annul the neder. The husband annulled the neder. So we'll say, so watch this. Watch what's happening over here. Rachel took a neder Nazirus. Then what happened? She violated the terms of her Nazir. She drank wine. Then what happens afterwards? Her husband, Ruvain, heard about the Nazirus. What was his reaction? Annulment. Okay. And now what the Bracha is telling me is, sounds like, despite the fact that the husband annulled the neder, what's Rachel's liability? Malchus. What does that sound like? I will say, when a husband annulled his wife's neder, it had the ability to what? Retroactively uproot it and annul it. Then should there be Malchus liability? Not at all. Because then he's actively uprooting the neder from its beginning. The fact that she gets Malchus tells us that what? Ella, lav shmamina, bal megas gayis. Rather, I will say, what do you see? That the mechanics of hafara are such that when a husband annuls his wife's neder, what is he effectively doing? Shutting it down from this point going forward. From this point going forward. That's the end of the neder nazir. And that's what I will say. What that does is, there's no longer a neder from this point forward, but halacha l'maisa, the neder did exist previously. I will say, remember again, the fundamental nafkamina between me'aker or megas gayas was after the process of hafara, do we view the neder as ever having existed? If you hold me'aker, the neder never existed. Therefore, there was no violation, and therefore there's no need for malchus. But if you hold me'aker, the neder did exist. The husband is just shutting it down from this point going forward, in which case, if she did violate the terms of her neder nazirus earlier, there is liability for that. So the fact that the Bracha says she gets malchus tells us that what? Tells us that halacha l'maisa megas gayis, that a husband shuts it down from this point going forward. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. So the Gemara says, guys. The Olam Eibon Lacha. The Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe I'll really tell you as follows. Maybe in reality the husband actually retroactively uproots the neder. But rather, I will say the Mishnah is trying to create some type of symmetry. Or the Bracha is trying to create some type of symmetry. What's the symmetry? Hefer labayla v'hilo yada. I will say, because what's the end case? The end case, same case. Rachel's married to Ruvain. Rachel becomes a Nazira. And then what happens? Her husband annulled the neder, but she never knew about it. So in other words, and that's fine, because hafara could work that way, right? That he heard about the neder, she made the neder, he heard about it, he annulled it, she did not know about the annulment. And what? She's going ahead, she's drinking and becoming tameh, not knowing, thinking about it. What is she thinking? She's thinking that she's violating terms of her neder nazirus. What she doesn't realize is that her husband Reuben already annulled it. Ultimately, again, she doesn't get malchus. I will say, why doesn't she get malchus? Why not? Because the neder has been annulled, right? She didn't know about it, but the neder has been annulled. Therefore, top of chav base tana nami reisha sofeges. So it could very well be that we're trying to establish some type of textual symmetry, and ultimately, since we're going to say in this seifa, she doesn't get malchus, we'll say in the reisha that she does get malchus. Okay, fine. So Tasha says, Rabbi say, issue still unresolved. So Rabbi say, halacha l'maisa is a husband me'akar, does he retroactively uproot, right? Totally uproot the neder of his wife as if it never existed, or megas gayus. Does it simply shut it down from this point going forward? So let's analyze it a bit more. So Tashma, we'll say first line on Bezim Dalef 22a, Hayisha shenadra benazir v'nitmeis, a woman who becomes a Nazira. Same case. Rachel is married to Ruvain, Rachel becomes a Nazira, v'nitmeis, and then she becomes Tmeya, v'achar kach, Hefer la baila. So we'll say, so again, same progression. Rachel becomes a Nazira, After she becomes a Nazirah, she has a glass of wine, she goes to a levaya, and then I will say, then what happens? After that, her husband annuls her neder. Okay? What's the halacha? Mevia chatas ha'of, ve'ena mevia olas ha'of. Rabbi says she has to bring, remember her bird chatos, but she does not bring her bird ola. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, what's going on over here? V'i sakadaitcha bal megas gayis, teisi nami ola sa'of. Rabbi say, if we held that megas gayis means what? The husband, what's his power? Shut down the neder now, going forward. But whatever liability was incurred up until this point she's still liable for. Therefore, if that's the case, halacha lamaisa, why is she only bringing the chatos? She should also have to bring the ola. Rather, what do you see from here? Elamai, me akar. Rather, I'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha lamaisa, when the husband annuls the neder, what is he doing? He's going and retroactively annulling everything. That's why she's not chayiv the ola. But one second, if that's the case, you know the next question. If that's the case, that the husband is retroactively annulling the neder, then what? Then what should be the halacha? Why she chayiv chatos? Remember again, akar makes it as if the neder never occurred. The neder never occurred. Well, if the neder never occurred, then what Rabbi said? Then what? There was no violation. If there was no violation, then what? There should be no chatos. So what's going on over here? So Rabbi said, it's incredible, by the way, that we've seen this same answer now 3 times in the last 4 days. The Gemara says, listen to this. If that's the case, ve'elamai me'akar. If that's the case, chatas of nami lo teisi. Hachi nami. You're right. You are right. In reality, the Gemara is suggesting, when a husband annuls his wife's neder, it's me'akar. He's retroactively annulling the neder as if it never occurred. And that's why that's what I say. So again, follow this progression. Rachel's married to Reuven. Rachel says Harini Nazira. Right after she does that, let's celebrate. She has a glass of wine, goes to the cemetery. Okay? Afterwards, what happens? Her husband goes ahead and annuls her neder. Right? Because remember again, when does a husband have the ability to annul his wife's neder? Biyom Shama, on the day that he hears this. Let's say he hears about it 4 days later. 4 days later. He goes ahead and he annuls it. So Rabbi says, now what's the halacha? The Gemara is suggesting, what's the halacha? When a husband annuls his wife's neder, what are the mechanics of that afara? Me'akar. Retroactive nullification. That's why Rabbi says she is not going to have to bring her olas ha'of. But one second, the Bracha says she has to bring a chatos. But why would she have to bring a chatos if ultimately the neder itself was retroactively nullified? And Rabbi say, this is an incredible answer. Here we go. In reality, you shouldn't have to bring the chatos. So why do we make her bring the chatos? Watch this. The Gemara says, Vaha money, Rabbi Eliezer HaKafar. Both says Rabbi Eliezer HaKafar. Tisanya Rabbi Eliezer HaKafar. Omer, Ma Talmud Lomer Me'asher Chata Al HaNefesh V'chi Be'ezon Nefesh. This is the famous drasha. The pasuk says that ultimately, when talking about the sacrificial rights of the Nazir who becomes tamei, it says that the Kohen will atone for him Me'asher Chata Al HaNefesh, because the Nazir sinned about the soul. Asks the Gemara, V'chi be'ezon nefesh chata? But I don't understand, what soul, how did the Nazir sin? What soul did he sin with? Ela mipnei shetzir atzmo min hayayin nikra chotei. Now we'll say, what's the sin of the Nazir? What's the sin of the Nazir? Unnecessary abstention. Unnecessary deprivation. You didn't have to deprive yourself of wine, and it was sinful that you deprived yourself of something that was truly mutter. So Rabbi says, listen to this. Okay, so before we go on, so we'll say, just watch what's happening over here. What the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. The Gemara is suggesting is, so let's play this out, right? Let's just link it all together. So Rachel is married to Reuven. Rachel says, Harini Nazira. What's the halacha when she said Harini Nazira? She's a Nazir. What does she do? The next day, she goes in and she drinks wine, goes to a cemetery. Violation of her Nazirus. What happens? The next day, Reuven, her husband, hears about it. What does he do? He's made for it. We'll say, what are the mechanics of hafara? What do we just say the mechanics of hafara are? Me'akar. Retroactively uproots the neder in its entirety. So that's why she's not going to be chayiv, obviously, Shlamim. She's also not going to be chayiv the ola. but yet she is still chayaves the chatos. But I don't understand. If he retroactively annuls her neder nazirus, why is she chayav chatos? So the Gemara gives a dramatic answer. The truth is, the chatos that's brought is for a different reason. The chatos that's brought was because the act of becoming a nazir itself and of abstaining unnecessarily is sinful. So and this is incredible. It turns out that even though her neder nazirus is retroactively taken away, retroactively removed, Rabbi say, what can't you remove from the secret? What can't you remove from this picture? What can't you remove from the story? What can't you remove? That she abstained. That act, I will say, that act of a person depriving themselves of something that is mutter, that act of a person depriving themselves of something that is inherently permitted, Eliezer Kafir says is sinful. I will say, by the way, I just want to point out, it's incredible how this links up with Mesilas Yesharim, right? What did we just learn in Ramchal this morning? What did we just learn? Ramchal said that the way to reach humility is through episodic deprivation, right? By not indulging in every single thing. But I will say, in the same breath, what does Ramchal say? Be careful. Be careful how you do that. Because Hashem created the world for us to enjoy. Hashem created the world for us to indulge. You just have to indulge responsibly. And you just have to know that at times, you have to pass on certain things. Not because they're usher, but because they're not good for you. Because they're not the right things that you need in order to fully self-actualize. So I will say, what's happening over the Gemara is suggesting, why is Rachel bringing a chatos? This isn't really a chatos for a Nazir. This is a chatos that is brought for the sinful behavior of engaging in unnecessary deprivation. And I will say, it's such a fascinating idea. Because we think to ourselves, unnecessary deprivation, there's no such thing. We're often conditioned to think the more you deprive, the more machmer you are, the holier. I will say, we see it's not true. Sometimes when a person deprives themselves of too much, sometimes when a person is machmer in every single area of life, it actually creates a negative feeling towards Yiddishkeit. It creates a negative feeling towards Chosh Baruch Hu. If everything is aser, then life becomes oppressive. And a relationship with Hashem becomes something that is so uncomfortable and so unenjoyable. So Eliezer HaKafir says, what are you doing? Anything Hashem wants aser, He already made aser. Okay, and furthermore, He gave Chazal the right to go ahead and legislate and make things asr as well. Chazal will do their job. They'll make some additional stuff asr as well. Don't make more things asr. You'll say, so, but why not? Isn't that the name of the game? Right? The more stuff you can make asr, the frummer you are, the more respected you are, the more catapulted you'll be, the more strictures you could create. Isn't it? No. I will say we see it. When Yiddishkeit becomes an iron fist, right? When Yiddishkeit becomes like, let's try to asr everything we can, what ends up happening? We'll say we see what ends up happening. You have an exodus. And not the good kind, right? Not the Parashas B'Shalach kind, right? The exodus of people who says, you know what? I don't need this. I don't want this. I just want to be a normal, whatever normal means, happy, well-adjusted, content person. I will say, by the way, here's the incredible part. That's what Hashem wants for us as well. Yeah, there are things that need to be aser. The Rebbe Shalom, He's got this. He's got it, right? And whatever He doesn't have, He has everything. But He also gave an additional koach to Chazal, to aser additional things. So between the Rebbe Shalom, Torah Shebechsav, between ultimately, again, Chazal, Torah Sheba'peh, we have everything we need to be aser. Rabbi Eliezer Kafir says, don't start introducing new stuff. Even though Nazir is not a new, right? Nazir is a biblical concept. But you don't need to make something additional aser. And therefore, I will say, it's incredible. Rabbi Eliezer Kafir will suggest that the chatas you bring is actually not for the neder nazirus. It's fascinating. The chatas you're going to bring is for the act of abstention. I will say, deracheha darchei noam. And I will say, we know this even in parenting. In parenting, it's so important. That a parent has to put down rules. I will say, it's unfortunately a very new age parenting thing. That parents don't put down rules. They're afraid to enforce things with their kids. No, that's your job as a parent, to put down rules, to put down guidelines, and to enforce them. And for your children to recognize that if you don't enforce them, there's repercussions for non-compliance. It sounds so penal, in nature. But that's what it takes to raise proper children. You have to behave a certain way. And if you don't behave a certain way, here is what's going to happen. Whether it's losing of privileges or of rights, not rights, sounds like China. Right? So again, but you understand, right? But at the same time, with love, and to create an atmosphere of love and a Yiddishkeit of love, and for my children to know that when they can't do things because they're Jewish, it's the greatest privilege in the world, not something oppressive. All from Allah Zara Kafir. In any event, so that's a lot to figure out with this. But again, we'll go back there. So we'll say, so that's why halacha l'maisa, the chatos that you bring, interesting if Rabbi Zara Kafir posits, is not for the net nezirus. The chatas that you bring is for the act of abstaining unnecessarily. Incredible. So the Gemara says, because he went ahead and unnecessarily abstained from wine, he's called a sinner. We'll say there are those amongst us who take this very seriously and never chas v'shalom want to be called the chote. Never chas want to be called the chote. If a person who just simply abstains from wine is called the sinner, first white line, hamitzar atzmumi called davar alachas kama v'kama. So I will say this is just a side point. If from abstaining from wine, which is one thing is called the chote, I will say all the more so someone who unnecessarily deprives himself from all the other beautiful things in the world, how much he is called the chote. As Rabbi said, the Rebbe Shalom created this world for us to enjoy responsibly, right? Enjoy b'kedusha, b'tara, enjoy with koved rosh, enjoy with anava. But the world is here to enjoy. Life is here to enjoy. Kadosh Baruch Hu just asks us to do it through the prism of kedusha. So we'll say, so ultimately again, I just want to point out where we are right here in this moment. Is, it sounds like what the Gemara is saying is that the mechanics of hafara are what? Me'akar. That's what it sounds like the Gemara. That's what the Gemara is ending off with right over here. So let's go back there. So Tashma, the Sanya B'Yad was very explicit brayso. Ha'isha shenadra benazir v'shama chaverta. Great case. Listen to this. Rachel is married to Ruvain. Rachel says Harini Nazira. They both say Rachel is a friend Leah. So Leah hears what Rachel did, and what does she do? Va'amra va'ani. What does Leah say? Amen. Me too. Uba baila sharishona the hefer la. So watch this. Now Rachel's husband Ruvain heard that Rachel became a Nazira. He doesn't like it. What does he do? He annuls it. Right? The hefer la. He muteres v'chaverta asura. So we'll say, so now what happens? So just to follow the progression. Rachel said Harini Nazira. Leah, her friend, says, you know what? Va'ani, me too. Great idea. Ruvain, Rachel's husband, heard that his wife became a Nazira. What does he do? He doesn't like it. He cancels the neder. He annuls the neder. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Here it is. He muteres v'chaverta asura. Ultimately, again, she is muteres. Ultimately, again, so Rachel has had her neder annulled. V'chaverta asura. But Leah is still a Nazira. And I will say, what do you see from this? Shmamina bal megas gayis. I will say, what do you see from here? That when a husband, I will say, now here, watch this. If you hold me akar, if you held that Allah Chalamaisa, when a husband goes in and annuls the neder, what happens? It retroactively annuls it. Then I will say, what should be Leah's status? Leah should also be muteres. The fact that Rachel is no longer in Nazira, but Leah is, tells us that what? That halacha l'maisa, the mechanics of hafara is you shut down the neder now. You shut it down now, right? You shut it down from this point going forward, but you don't retroactively annul it. So I will say, so because of that, Rachel will no longer be in Nazira, but Leah will continue to be in Nazira. Therefore, the Gemara says, what do you see from here? Shmamina bal megas gayis. You see from here that halacha l'maisa, the mechanics of hafara are not akar. It's not retroactive uprooting, but rather what? What hafara does is it shuts the neder down at this point going forward. So we'll say that is where this sugya ends for now. So it sounds like, and it's incredible, just before I was saying akar, sounds like over here, kind of like the stop of the Gemara, bal megas gayas. That a husband goes in and when he annuls his wife's neder, the mechanics of hafara are, shuts the neder down now from this point going forward. Did the neder exist in the past? Did it exist? Yes. Absolutely. Could there be ramifications for her behavior before the hafara? Absolutely. But the power of hafara is it shuts it down from this point going forward. So I will say, we're going to take that as the conclusion for now, although we're going to loop it back to it in a little bit. So now we're going to switch gears for just a bit. I will say last time, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Im Amrullah Harini Nazir Kimoseich, Shtehen Mutaros. Rabbi Shimon says, listen to this. Rabbi Shimon says that we'll say now, again, same thing. Halacha l'maisa. So Rachel is married to Reuben. Rachel says Harini Nazira. Then what happens? Leah hears this, but what does Leah say? Hareini kimosech. Now both say, remember, beforehand, what was Leah saying? Vani, me too. Now she's saying Hareini kimosech. I am like you. I am like you. Now both say, same case. Reuven comes along and is made for Rachel's neder. So what happens? Now the Gemara says, Shtehen mutaros. Both Rachel and Leah are mutar. Amabez will say. Marzucha berei drav mari amar. So we'll say, so now, what's different between this case and the previous case? The difference is Harini kimosech. Now we'll say, how do you translate Harini kimosech? I am like you in every way. So I will say, so what this sounds like is, I will say, that what Leah's doing in this case is, see, va'ani, what does va'ani mean? Va'ani mean, oh, you became a Nazira, I'll also become a Nazira. But I will say, but right after that moment, that Leah says, kind of, I'm a Nazira, she's got her own Neder Naziris going. Right? Harini kimosech almost sounds like, what the Gemara is saying over here is, Leah's saying, my Neder Naziros is like your Neder Naziros in every single way. And therefore, again, I both say, in this case over here, when Reuven, Rachel's husband, is made for Rachel's Neder Naziros, guess what? Leah's is annulled as well. Since Leah inextricably linked her Neder Naziros with Rachel, so therefore, again, if Rachel's comes to an end, Leah comes to an end as well. Shabbos say, the Gemara said, Marzucha Amabeis, Marzucha Idrav Mari Amar, Hainu Durami Barchama. Shabbos said, this is actually great. So Marzutra said this case, this particular case, Harini Kimosech, sounds a lot like the case of Rami Barchama. Shabbos said, Rami Barchama, watch this. Rami Barchama, Hare alai ki basar zevach shlemimau. Okay, we'll say here's the case. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi's on the left-hand side, first wide line. I'm sorry, I should say last wide line. Hare alai ki basar zivchei shlamim ki gon shemun achlefana basar zevach shlamim umachis nami de'atera kamei ba'amar zeh kazem out. Suppose here's the case. I have a piece of shlamim meat. HaLevi, we should be zocha. Right? I have a piece of shlamim meat in front of me, and I have a piece of regular meat in front of me. And what do I say? This piece of meat should be like the shlamim. Harezeh kizeh. The regular chulin meat should be like the shlamim. Okay. So we'll say, watch this. Rabbi Chama asked the following kasha. Mahu. Then we'll say, what does that statement mean? Ki matvis inish bi kara matvis, o dilma bitsinina kamatvis. Then we'll say, this is incredible. Think about this shlamim for just a moment. A shlamim has two different stages. Right? What are the stages in the shlamim? Before zrika and after zrika. What's the status of shlamim before zrika? Status of shlamim before zrika? Aser. Status of shlamim after zrika? Mutter. So I will say, see, here's what's interesting. When you have a piece of meat, and you write a piece of shlamim, piece of regular meat, and I say, this regular piece of meat should be like the shlamim, what are you saying? Or I would say, now, by the way, I want to point out, we've learned this in Maseches Nedarim. What is this called? Excuse me. Thank you. What is this called? Ultimately, again, when you link something that is asr, mutter, to something that is asr, what do we call that? Hatfasa. Excellent. Hatfasa. So in other words, if I have something asr, something mutter, and I say zu kizu, this one should be like this one. The mutter item should be like the asr. It's called hatfasa. So I'll say, so now the fundamental shaila is, when you're matfis, a permitted item to a prohibited item, but that prohibited item has two states. It has a primary state of this, or original state of this. So that's what it's called. So what's I say in the Gemara? Mao. Kimatvis inishpi karamatvis. When a person does hatfasa, is he linking the permitted item to the original state of the prohibited item? That's neikara. So in other words, shlamim before zrika, al dilma bitsinina matvis. Or maybe ultimately again he's linking. I will say, what does sinina really mean? So name cool down. Cool down state also means like the present state. In other words, after zrika, the cool down state, meaning cooled down from kedusha. Cooled down from kedusha. Someone mentioned it. So who mentioned the Var to the Achikala of Tzinu Mupachim on Shabbos? David? Tzinu Mupachim, beautiful, right? David spoke during, we had such a kiddush, and it's incredible to think, right, it's amazing to think like where you were just a little while ago, right? We're having kiddush, Baruch Hashem, overlooking the Harabayis, right? David gave the word tzinu apachim, right? Being on fire, being cooled down. Good. So the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, so that's the shaila. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so this is actually an interesting discussion in general, which is halacha l'maisa, when you link something permitted to something prohibited, and the prohibited item has two states, an original state of Isser and a latter state of Heter, what are you linking the permitted item to? To the Ikara, to the original state, or to the Tsinina, the current permitted state? That's the Shaila. So the Gemara wants us to suggest both sides. This is actually very interesting. So I'll just show what's happening over here. Marzutra is linking these two cases, the case of the Shlamim to the case of the Nazira. They both say, what happened in the case of the Nazira? Rachel says, Hareini Nazira. Rachel says, Hareini Nazira. And then what happens? Leah says, Va'ani kemosech. Va'ani kemosech. So I will say, when Leah says, Va'ani kemosech, ultimately, what is she linking herself to? Is she just linking herself to say, like, you're a Nazira, therefore I'm a Nazira? Or is she linking herself to the Iker Neder Nazirus of Rachel? And is she saying, Rachel, whatever the state of your Neder Nazirus, that's the state of my Neder Nazirus. Is she being matfis be'ikr to the essence of Rachel's Neder Nazirus? Or is she just linking to just the general state of Nazirus? To which the Gemara says, no, it's not a really good comparison. The Gemara says, Midami Hasam, Kevan Damaharei Alai Kebasar Zevach Shlamim. When a person says about the chulin piece of meat, that this piece of meat should be like the meat of the Shlamim, Afagav Dla Achar Shenizrak Damo, Matzi Achale B'chutz, Mikdash Kaddish. See, with Shlamim, at the end of the day, even though post Zrika, you could eat the meat, still about say what? The meat has Kiddusha. The meat has an inherent Kiddusha associated with it. Aval Halcha, but again, about say here in the case of Naziros, ultimately, again, I will say, if you hold that Alocha Lamaisa, she's matvis, ultimately, again, in the Tsinina case, right? In other words, in the latter stage, that means the neder is going to be on. I was about to say, why would Leah link her neder Naziros to the ability to be annulled by Rachel's husband? That doesn't make any sense. Why would she create a neder Naziros like that? To which the Gemara says, Ikid Amri, Hayud Rai Barchama. So we'll say an alternate version of this. Ultimately, again, some say that this very question is the question of Rai Barchama. So we'll say, so let's just bring this together. So I just want to point out, the Gemara doesn't really come to a halachic conclusion with this, but I will tell you is as follows. Let's go back to the Shlamim case for just a moment. In the Shlamim case, I will say, Halacha Lamaisa, if you go ahead and you have a piece of meat, that's chulin, next to a piece of meat of Shlamim, and you say, Hare zu kizu, this one should be like that one, the Rambam Paskins be karam matvis. That what you're doing is, you are saying that the status of the chulin meat should be like Shlamim before Zrika. That's what we assume, be karab matvis. That when you make a neder, linking a permitted item to a prohibited item, the prohibited item has two states, you're linking it to the original state of prohibition, shlamim before zrika. So Rabbi say, the Gemara doesn't really end off with a conclusion, ultimately against the neder case. We're going to see. Rabbi say, remember, I just want to point out, all of these things are intertwined. And the truth is, they all really come back to the mechanics of hafara. That's why I was telling you before that even though the Gemara says that it sounds like it ended off over here, what? Megas Gaius, right? Megas, right? That's what it sounds like, Megas Gaius. That was what the Gemara said on the second to last line of Amud Aleph. That when a husband goes ahead and annuls his wife's neder, he's shutting it down from this point going forward, but now retroactively annulling it. We're going to have to see if that's in fact true. And every other case that we're mentioning over here is fundamentally dependent on that. Good. Weiter. Amr la harini nezira be'ikvech. So that's a very interesting case. So let's say he goes ahead and says, I am, right? So watch this. Rachel says, Harini Nazira. Here's the case, right? Rachel's Harini Nazira. Rachel's married to Reuven. Then what happens? Leah says, Harini Nazira bikvech. I am a Nazira in your footsteps. In your footsteps. So we'll say, sounds like what she's saying is, I'm following in your footsteps, right? I'm becoming Nazir in your footsteps. So, Mahu. So we'll say, what is the halacha? Now, say, now what's the question over here? Rashi says, so we'll say, so now here's the question, right? The unwritten part of the story is like this. Rachel says, Harini Nazira. Leah says, I'm a Nazir in your footsteps. Then what happens? Reuven, Rachel's husband, comes and annuls Rachel's neder. So what's the shayla? So Rachel's neder is annulled. What's the shayla? What's the impact on Leah? So Mahu. Hareini be'ikvech bekula milsa v'sharya. Do we say that Leah is saying to Rachel, I am following in your footsteps and everything. In other words, once again, almost like Hareini be'ikvech maybe is Hareini kimosech. My neder nazirus is inextricably linked up with yours. Therefore, if yours is annulled, then what? Then what? Mine is annulled as well. O Dilma, kimikame delefar labai levasir. Maybe not. Maybe when Leah said, I'm following in your footsteps, Rabbi said, what does following in your footsteps mean? What does it mean? Exactly what it says. You're a Nazira, and then what? I'm a Nazira. But that's kind of where the link between our two Nidarim end. That's where the link between our two Nidarim end. And I will say, I just want to point out, all of these questions are predicated on what? Predicated on what truth? Bal Megas Gaius. Right? I will say, because I want to be clear, because halacha lamaisa, if you go ahead and you hold Bal Me Akar, that a husband retroactively annuls a neder, then when Leah links her neder to Rachel, and afterwards Ruvain, Rachel's husband, annuls the neder, what happens to Leah's neder? It goes away. Why does it go away? Because there was never anything to link to. So I just want to be clear, all of these questions are predicated on the conclusion that the Gemara reached that Bal Megas Gaius, that halacha lamaisa, the mechanics for annulment is you shut it down from this point going forward. So now back to this case. Rachel says, Harini Nazira, right? Leah says, Nazira bikvech. I'm a Nazira in your footsteps. Reuven comes and annuls Rachel's neder Nazirus. So Rabbi says, so now what's the shayla? So do we say, Dilma, now, do we say that Leah meant to inextricably link her neder Nazirus with Rachel's, and therefore Rachel is going to be annulled, so too Leah's. Oh, Dilma mikame delefa labayla va'asira. Or maybe not. Maybe halacha lemaisa. All Leah was doing was what? Was essentially, literally following in Rachel's footsteps. Rachel, you became a Nazira. Now I'm becoming a Nazira. But that's kind of where our connection ends. So we'll say, what's the answer? So Tashma, let's analyze. So we'll say, now this is the Bracha, actually, same case we had in the Mishnah. So watch this. A woman who becomes a Nazira. Right? Rachel becomes a Nazira. And then what happens? Her husband hears Va'amra Va'ani. So Reuven hears and he says what? He says what? Me too. So in this case, Reuven is linking himself to his wife Rachel. Eino Yachal Lahafer. I will say, Reuven is unable to annul his wife's neder. Now why is he unable to annul his wife's neder? Why? Because remember again, his neder is built on her neder. And if he annuls her neder, then effectively he's annulling his own as well. And a person can't annul their own neder. But 1 second. But 1 second. But if in general, let's go back to the previous case. If when we say Va'ani, already bikvech, following in your footsteps, then really you're supposed to say, what's the intention over here? What's the intention? The intention is to link oneself to the original neder, but not to be inextricably linked throughout the entire process of Nazirus. Then if that's the case, Leifar le'ledida, ve'lokim didei. How's supposed to say? If we say that when a person says Va'ani, or Haredi Kimosech, or Haredi Be'ikvech, what they're really doing is what? Saying, listen, Leah, you became a Nazir, and therefore what? I'm also a Nazir. But that's where our Nazirite connection ends. Now you go down your journey, I'll go down my journey. If that's the case, then what should happen? Reuven, the husband, should be able to be made for his wife's neder. Why? They both say, what does Safara do? Mega's guy, it doesn't retroactively uproot, shuts it down. So Leah's done, but Reuven should still be able to continue. Right? Reuven should still be able to continue. The fact that he can't do this tells us that Elav Shmamino Bekula de Milsa Mitvas. So I both say, rather, what do you see from here? You see from here that that's not the mechanics. When you say Va'ani, already Be'ikvech, already Kimosech, I will say, you're not just simply latching onto the Neder Naziris. What are you doing? You're inextricably linking yourself with the vower. And what you're saying is, whatever is the fate of your Neder Nazirus, my Neder Nazirus shares the same fate. And that's why halacha l'maisa, when Rachel says Harini Nazira, and Reuven says Va'ani Amin, Reuven can't annul the Neder. Why? Because I will say his Neder Nazirus is what? Fundamentally tied up with hers. And therefore, if he annuls hers, he's effectively doing what? Annulling his own as well, which is also incredible. Allah shmamina bekula de milsa mitvis. Rather, you see from here that when you say vani, already be'ikvech, already kimosech, what you're doing is you're inextricably linking your neder nazirus with the neder of the original vower. The hilcha hu de lo matzi mefer. So therefore, husband doesn't have the ability to go ahead and be made for his wife's neder, because being made for his wife's neder Naziris will effectively annul his as well. So I will say, but 1 second. Ha'isha da'amra harini bekvech, hinami muteras. So I will say, if that's the case, then halacha l'maisa, going back for just a second, when Rachel said harini nazira, and Leah said, harini bekvech, I'm following in your footsteps, and then Reuben comes and annuls Rachel's neder, what should happen? Leah should become permitted as well. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Lo li olam b'ikara matvis. Maybe not. I will say, maybe in reality, when you say vani, or for that matter, again, harini bekvech, harini kimosech, what are you doing? You're linking yourself just to the original neder. Just the original neder. Not say, you're not inextricably linking yourself forever with this neder naziros. So if that's the case, why can't Reuven annul his wife's neder and still leave his own neder naziros intact? Watch this. V'hacha, kevan da'amar va'ani, since Reuven, the husband, said va'ani ka'omar, kayim lechi dami. I will say it's different over here, because in this case, because he went ahead and said va'ani, I will say implicit in va'ani is what? What is he doing? He's affirming her neder. Well, 1 second. Once a husband affirms his neder, he can't what? He can't annul it unless, of course, what? He first seeks out the annulment of his affirmation. If he's able to go ahead and annul his affirmation, then enachinami can work, but otherwise he can't. So let's just kind of piece together what we have over here. What we have over is as follows. Halakha, what the Gemara seems to be saying is that in general, and again, we'll see what the actual, we're not finished yet, but where the Gemara is concluding right now, two fundamental conclusions. Conclusion number one is that halakha l'maisa, when you go ahead, when a husband annuls the neder, they will say, what is he doing? Bal negas gaius. Shuts down the neder from this point forward, but does not retroactively annul the neder. That's fact one. Fact two, Rabbi will say, is that when you link yourself to someone's neder naziros, it sounds like where the Gemara is ending off right here is why halacha l'maisa. What are you linking to? What are you linking to? To the original core neder. What are you not doing? Inextricably linking yourself forever with the initial vower. That sounds like what the Gemara is saying over here. If that's the case, then when Rachel says harini nazira and Reuven says va'ani, so why can't Reuven annul his wife's neder naziros and still leave his intact? The Gemara says that's the technicality. The technicality ultimately is because we're saying va'ani. What is he doing? He's affirming her neder. And once he affirms her neder, ultimately again he does not have the ability just to revoke it. Okay, we'll say shkoyach. We'll stop here for today. Again, we'll confirm if those two truths are still true tomorrow. Mir Hashem. Shkoyach. Is your gun tomorrow? Did you see?